If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. When the channel reaches 1,000 subscribers, I'll share a surprise story I've prepared especially for you. The wind cut across the frozen steppe like a steady blade, carrying the smell of burned oil and rust. The Kursk airfield, once crowded with life, was now a graveyard of metal. Rows of half-buried planes leaned at odd angles, their wings blackened from fire. Every footstep broke through a thin crust of ice. Soldiers moved slowly, wrapped in heavy coats, their breath turning to fog. Somewhere, a hammer struck metal, a dull, repetitive sound in the still morning air. Captain Andrei Volkov walked between the wrecks, his boots sinking in the snow. He had been stationed here for months, long enough for the landscape to lose all meaning. Once he was known for his precision flying, a quiet, disciplined officer with a clean record. Now he looked worn down, his face gaunt, the lines around his eyes deepened by lack of sleep. His old squadron was gone, shot down over Belgorod in a single afternoon. Since then, command had left him grounded, listed as non-operational until further orders. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew why. He hadn't been the same since the crash that killed his crew. He stopped beside the broken aircraft everyone called the wreck. Its body was stripped, the engine half missing, the left wing bent like a broken arm. Someone had scrawled, "Do not repair," on the fuselage in white paint. A pair of young mechanics stood nearby, smoking, laughing quietly about how it should be buried, not fixed. Andrei didn't say anything. He just looked at the plane, not as a machine, but as a memory. He touched the metal with a gloved hand, feeling the cold press through the leather. From the hangar entrance, Lieutenant Anna Michailova watched him. She was a field nurse attached to the 142nd Air Regiment since the previous summer. Her uniform was clean, but frayed at the edges. She had been tending to frostbite cases, shrapnel wounds, and the endless flow of broken men sent back from the front. Her hands were covered in small cuts, the kind that never had time to heal. She was 26, a former medical student from Moscow who had volunteered the day her brother was killed in Leningrad. She carried a small kettle of hot water and a dented thermos. The soldiers around her had started packing medical supplies for the evacuation. The order came that morning. The Germans were moving east again. Every usable vehicle had to leave by nightfall. The field hospital would be dismantled and the airfield abandoned. She walked up to Andrei, stopping a few paces away. "You shouldn't be out here," she said, her voice calm but tired. He turned his head slightly. "I've got nowhere else to be." For a few seconds, neither moved. Snow fell in fine grains, settling on their coats. She handed him a thermos. "Hot tea. Last of it." He nodded once, taking it without a word. The warmth seeped into his fingers. She studied his face, the distant look, the slow movements of a man who hadn't spoken to anyone properly in weeks. "You were with the 22nd Squadron," she said quietly. "The one that didn't come back." He looked at her briefly, his jaw tightening. "Yes. I'm sorry." He gave a faint, almost invisible nod. "So am I." She didn't press further. They both stood in silence, the only sound the wind moving through the hangar beams. Inside, a group of soldiers was loading crates onto a truck. Someone shouted for her, "Lieutenant, we're leaving in 20 minutes." She turned toward the voice, but didn't move. There was something about the man standing before her. Not his rank, not his uniform, but the quiet endurance in his face. Andrei took a slow breath. He had been told to destroy whatever was left before retreating, but he couldn't do it. Something about the wrecked plane, its battered frame, its refusal to fall apart completely, reminded him of himself. He thought about the night his squadron died, the radio static, the sudden fire, the silence that followed. He had replayed it every night since, searching for the point where he could have done something different. "Do you ever think it'd still fly?" he asked suddenly, his voice low. Anna frowned. "That thing? No one would dare try." He gave a faint smile. "Then maybe it deserves one last chance." The words surprised even him. They came out of nowhere, like something spoken before thought could intervene. Anna looked at him carefully, seeing that he wasn't joking. There was no pride in his tone, only a quiet, tired certainty. She hesitated. The engine stripped, There are holes in the fuel line. Half the gauges are missing. I can fix what matters. And what's that? He looked at her. Direction. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. He wasn't mad, she realized, just empty. The kind of emptiness that could turn into courage if given a reason. The truck horn sounded again, the last convoy preparing to move. She turned toward the noise, then back at him. You should come with us, she said softly. He shook his head. Not this time. She stood there for another second, then nodded slowly. All right, she said, almost whispering. Then I'll leave you some tools in the hangar. Just in case. When she walked away, he watched her go. There was something steady in her movements, even when the cold made her limp slightly. She wasn't staying for him. Not yet, but he could feel that she understood him in a way others didn't. That night, long after the convoy left, Andre remained in the hangar alone. The generator hummed faintly. He unrolled a toolkit and began working under the yellow light. He didn't know if the plane would ever rise again, but he needed to try. In the distance, artillery echoed, a reminder that the front was moving closer. For the first time in months, he didn't think about dying. He thought about fixing something broken. And in another part of the camp, Anna sat by a half-empty cot, unable to sleep. She stared at the door, the wind rattling it in short bursts, and wondered if the quiet pilot was still working and why she cared. The next morning, the sky was gray and heavy. The wrecked warplane stood where it always had, but something had changed. Its cockpit glass was clear of frost. Tools were scattered on the ground. And inside the hangar, the kerosene lamp still burned, a small, steady flame that refused to go out. The convoy was gone. Tire tracks cut across the frozen field, leading toward the southern road, now covered by falling snow. The airfield was silent again. Only the wind moved through the hangars, carrying the faint metallic echo of loose panels and the distant pulse of artillery. It was past midnight when Andrei Volkov stepped back into the hangar. His breath fogged the air. The kerosene lamp he'd left burning still flickered on the workbench, its light casting long, uneven shadows over the stripped-down fuselage. He had spent the entire day tightening bolts, sealing gaps, and replacing what little could be replaced. Every sound in the hangar seemed to grow louder now that he was alone. The creak of old hinges, the slow drip of melting ice from the rafters. The more he worked, the more his hands shook from exhaustion. His eyes burned from lack of sleep. Yet he kept going, driven not by orders or pride, but by something simpler, a quiet need to make the wreck whole again, even if it killed him. He paused to rest his back against the wall. The lamplight caught his face, pale, unshaven, lined with fatigue. For a moment, he thought about the life he used to have before the war. The mornings when he would fly for training runs over the Volga, his wife waiting by the airfield fence, their son barely 3 years old. Both were gone now, victims of the winter bombings 2 years earlier. He never spoke of them, not even in his flight reports. But every time he looked at the sky, he felt the same dull ache. Not grief anymore, just the habit of missing them. The hangar door creaked. He turned sharply, his hand reaching instinctively for his pistol. The lamp's light fell across a familiar figure, Lieutenant Anna Michailova, her coat dusted with snow. She had come back. Her boots left wet marks on the frozen floor as she stepped in, carrying a small wooden crate. I told you to leave, Andre said, his voice hoarse. You did, she replied calmly. I didn't listen. She set the crate down beside him, tools, rags, and a roll of copper wire. The supply truck dropped these before leaving, she explained. Figured you might use them better than anyone else. He looked at her for a moment, unsure what to say. There was something steady in her tone. No pity, no apology. Just fact. You know this is pointless, he said quietly. She met his eyes. I know. Then why stay? She looked at the plane, its torn skin, the frost glinting on the canopy. Because you didn't stop working. People who've given up don't do that. Her words hit harder than he expected. He turned away, tightening a loose panel to keep from answering. She took off her gloves and began helping without waiting for his permission, holding the lamp steady, passing him tools, checking for cracks in the fuel line. Her hands were red and raw from the cold, the skin around her nails split. She winced occasionally, but didn't complain. They worked in silence. Outside, snow drifted past the broken windows, thickening by the hour. Every so often, artillery thundered in the far distance, a dull tremor that shook the floor beneath them. Between repairs, she asked softly, "Why this plane? There are better ones, even damaged." He didn't look up. "Because this one was mine." She studied him. "You flew it before?" He nodded once. "On the day they all died." The confession hung in the air. He tightened the wrench harder than necessary, metal grinding against metal. "You were grounded after that," she said gently. "I grounded myself." She wanted to ask more, but she saw the strain in his face, the weight of memory pressing against composure. So instead, she handed him a strip of cloth to wrap around a cracked pipe. Hours passed. The temperature inside dropped until their breath came out in thick clouds. The lamp dimmed, the fuel nearly spent. Andre leaned over the control panel, connecting the remaining wires. When the last one sparked faintly, he smiled for the first time in days. Not joy, but relief that something still worked. Anna sat nearby, rubbing warmth into her fingers. "If you fix it, will you fly it?" "Yes." "Alone?" He hesitated. "Someone has to cover the retreat. Command won't send anyone else. If I can get it off the ground, I could buy time for the wounded to reach the river." She watched him closely. "You know you probably won't come back." He met her eyes without flinching. "I'm not supposed to." The calm way he said it made her chest tighten. She realized this was not a man searching for heroism, just someone trying to make peace with what was left. "I don't believe in hopeless things," she said quietly. "Then why are you still here?" "Because you do." The moment held, long enough for both of them to understand what the other meant. Neither spoke again for a while. By dawn, the wreck looked different. The patched metal gleamed faintly in the lamplight, the cockpit glass clear to frost. The improvised repairs held together with wire and bolts. It was far from ready, but it no longer looked dead. Andre tightened the last screw, then sat down heavily beside the plane. His hands were raw, his uniform stained with oil. Anna brought him a tin cup of water and sat across from him. The hangar was quiet except for the slow ticking of cooling metal. She broke the silence. "When I first saw you out there, I thought you were out of your mind. But now I think maybe this is the only sane thing left to try." He gave a faint nod. "Trying's all that's left." Outside, the first light of morning spread across the snow. The sky glowed pale gray, and for the first time in days, the guns fell silent. They both looked toward the horizon, not speaking. Anna reached for his scarf, straightened it, and said softly, "If you fly, I'll be here." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The wind pushed against the hangar door, whistling low, like a warning. Somewhere beyond the white fields, the front line was moving again. But for now, for a few fragile hours, there was only the sound of the storm gathering and two people, side by side, holding on to what little hope remained. Morning came in silence, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Snow had stopped falling, and the airfield lay still under a thin crust of frost. Beyond the hangars, smoke rose in dark columns from the west. The front line was close now, closer than anyone had expected. The sound of artillery rolled in distant waves, dull but steady, like thunder trapped behind the hills. Inside the hangar, Andrei Volkov tightened the last bolt on the fuel line and checked the patch propeller one final time. His face was pale from exhaustion, eyes ringed with sleepless shadows. The hours of work had stripped everything unnecessary from him. No pride, no fear, just a quiet, clear focus. Every move was deliberate. Every sound around him mattered. The faint ticking of the cooling engine, the rustle of Anna's coat as she packed medical supplies near the door, the creak of wind against the beams. Anna had not left his side through the night. Her uniform was stiff with frost, her hair tied loosely under her cap, the skin of her fingers cracked and red from the cold. Yet she looked calmer than before, almost steady. She moved between her small table and the aircraft, preparing bandages, checking morphine vials, setting aside the few medical kits that hadn't been taken with the convoy. She knew what was coming. Everyone who stayed knew. Andre stood back, inspecting the repaired plane in full daylight for the first time. The fuselage still bore deep scars. The metal was uneven where it had been hammered straight by hand. The paint had peeled off in places, leaving streaks of dull silver. Yet, somehow, the aircraft looked alive again. He had reconnected the power cables, sealed the cracked fuel tank with resin and wire, even replaced a broken compass using parts from another wreck. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't even safe, but it was enough. Anna broke the silence. The command post called, she said. They confirmed the main column is under attack, about 20 kilometers north. If they don't get air cover soon. He nodded, finishing her sentence quietly. They won't make it. She hesitated, watching him strap on his leather flight harness. You don't have to do this alone. There's no one left, he said simply. All the others were ordered to retreat or grounded with no planes. And you? I was never good at following orders. There was a faint attempt at a smile, but it didn't last. His hands were trembling slightly as he fastened the straps. Anna stepped closer and steadied them, tightening the buckles herself. Their eyes met for a brief moment. Neither spoke, but both understood. She was thinking about how easily this could be the last time she saw him. He was thinking about how he wanted her to remember him, not as a broken man, but as someone who finally did what mattered. Outside, the wind picked up. The runway stretched ahead, coated in snow and ice. Visibility was low, but the horizon glowed faintly, a thin band of pale light through the gray. Andre climbed into the cockpit. The seat creaked under his weight. He ran a gloved hand over the controls, the instruments flickering weakly as the generator kicked in. The patch canopy rattled slightly when he closed it. Anna stepped up to the side of the plane, resting one hand on the fuselage. Will it hold? She asked quietly. It will until it doesn't, he replied. The engine sputtered once, then again, coughing up thick gray smoke before catching. The sound filled the hangar, rough, uneven, but real. Anna stepped back, her coat whipping in the wind from the propeller. The mechanics who had stayed behind came running, drawn by the noise. They stood at a distance, stunned, watching the wreck tremble and roar to life. Andre checked the gauges, fuel low, pressure unstable, but it would have to do. Over the radio, a faint crackle came through, scattered reports of the advancing enemy, gunfire, chaos. He looked once toward Anna, through the frost-streaked glass. She raised her hand in a silent salute. He nodded back, lowering his goggles. The plane lurched forward, wheels biting into the snow. It shuddered violently as it gained speed. The mechanics shouted for him to stop. The left wing was vibrating dangerously, but he didn't listen. The tail lifted, the engine roared, and, for a brief moment, it seemed the wreck would collapse under its own weight. But then, with a burst of noise and snow spray, it left the ground. The hangar lights faded below him. The airfield shrank to a gray patch on the white landscape. For the first time in months, Andre felt weightless again, not free but alive. The wind pressed against the cracked canopy, the gauges rattled, and the entire plane seemed to groan with effort. It flew. He steadied the controls, keeping altitude low to avoid radar. The radio hissed and popped until a voice broke through, a field officer shouting coordinates, enemy vehicles moving fast toward the retreating Soviet column. Andre turned the nose north. Below him, the wide expanse stretched endlessly. Roads, forests, burned villages. Through the gaps in the clouds, he could see flashes of gunfire on the horizon. At the field hospital, Anna stood outside the hangar, shielding her eyes from the wind. The engine's echo faded into the distance until all that remained was the faint hum of the storm. She waited for the sound to return, and when it did, distant, faint, but steady, she allowed herself a single, trembling breath. In the sky ahead, Andre spotted the first line of enemy vehicles, trucks, armored cars, and scattered groups of men on the move. His hands gripped the controls tighter. Every movement sent a vibration through the cockpit, but he ignored it. He lined up the sights and opened fire. The machine guns shook violently, their rhythm uneven, but they hit. The first truck exploded, scattering men into the snow. He climbed, turned sharply, then dove again. Each pass drained the plane further, fuel dropping fast, oil leaking, the wings groaning. But he kept going. He thought of Anna's words the night before. Because you didn't stop working. People who've given up don't do that. He didn't stop now. Down below, the retreating convoy began to move faster, using the chaos he created to escape. For the first time, Andre felt purpose burn through the cold. Every shot, every maneuver was for something real. Not revenge, not duty, but life. By midday, the radio filled with broken messages, cheers from ground units, orders to withdraw, reports of the enemy scattering. His vision blurred from the smoke inside the cockpit. The temperature gauge climbed dangerously high. Still, he flew. From the airfield far behind, Anna listened to the last transmission come through, his voice rough but clear. Tell them the road's open. Keep moving east. Then silence. She stood motionless in the snow, the wind cold against her face, staring at the empty sky. The wreck had flown. Andrei Volkov was somewhere above the smoke, alone, fighting for everyone left behind. And for the first time since the war began, she felt something close to belief. The sky had turned to smoke. By early afternoon, the sun was hidden behind thick gray clouds, and snow drifted sideways through the haze of burning fuel. From his cockpit, Captain Andrei Volkov could barely see the ground. Only the black trails of explosions and flashes of light marking the frozen row below. The engine coughed and stuttered under strain, its temperature needle trembling near the red line. He adjusted the throttle gently, feeling the resistance in the controls. The wreck was holding together by willpower alone. Every vibration felt personal now, like the plane was alive and fighting beside him. Below, the Russian defectors who had joined the German advance were breaking formation. His first passes had done real damage. Trucks burning, vehicles overturned, soldiers scattering across the snow. But new waves kept coming. There were hundreds of them, spread wide over the valley, crawling like black dots toward the Soviet column retreating to the east. Andrei's fuel gauge was almost empty. He knew what that meant, but he didn't turn back. He steadied the stick, lined up the next run, and pressed the trigger. The guns rattled violently, bullets tearing through the enemy line. He could hear the wings creak under recoil. His jaw was tight, his breathing heavy through the oxygen mask. Between attacks, he glanced at the small photograph taped beside the compass. His wife and son, smiling on the steps of their home before the war. The edges were worn, almost colorless. He didn't need to look long. Just one glance was enough. On the ground, Anna Michailova stood outside the field tent, staring toward the horizon. The radio operator had been trying for 10 minutes to re-establish contact with Volkov's plane. All they got was static, broken, uneven bursts of sound. The men around her murmured that he must be down already, but she didn't believe it. She could still hear the faint hum in the distance, a struggling engine cutting through the wind. She gripped her scarf tighter, refusing to leave the post. Andre turned the plane for another dive. Smoke filled the cockpit. One of the gauges burst, spraying oil across the glass. He wiped it with his sleeve, blinking against the sting. The left wing shuddered violently. One of the struts had cracked. He ignored it. He couldn't stop now. Not when the convoy below was still under fire. Through the gun sight, he could see them, dozens of trucks crawling along the snow-covered road, the wounded clinging to the sides. He lowered altitude and fired again. The recoil shook the entire aircraft. Explosions rippled across the frozen plain. The enemy was retreating now, some falling back toward the forest. He had bought them time, maybe enough. His vision blurred. The smell of burning fuel was strong inside the cabin. When he checked the mirror, he saw the tail smoking. The radio crackled suddenly, a faint voice breaking through the static. "Ray, this is Field Command. Do you copy?" He leaned closer, pressing the receiver. "Volkov here. Fuel almost gone. Pull back." "Repeat, pull back." He exhaled slowly. "Negative," he said. "They're still exposed on the road. I can hold them off a few more minutes." "Volkov, you've done enough." He smiled faintly. "Not yet." The engine roared louder as he descended again. He felt the metal frame strain under the force. This time, He aimed directly for the largest cluster of enemy trucks regrouping near the tree line. He fired until the guns clicked dry. The last shells hit, tearing through the vehicles in bursts of orange flame. Then silence. The plane leveled out briefly, shaking from damage. Andre checked the instruments, altimeter spinning, oil pressure gone, engine temperature in the red. He knew it wouldn't last another minute. Still, he kept flying. Through the cracked glass, he could see the column of Soviet trucks moving eastward, away from the battle. They were clear. He reached for the radio once more. "Anna," he said quietly. The name came without thought, the only word that mattered now. "You'll make it." Back at the airfield, Anna froze as his voice came through the static. It was faint, almost swallowed by noise, but she recognized it instantly. She stepped closer to the receiver, whispering, "Andre, can you hear me? Come back. You can still land here." There was no answer, only the wind. In the sky, the wrecked plane banked hard to the left, its engine coughing one last time before catching fire. Andre didn't try to eject. The mechanism was jammed, and even if it weren't, he had already decided how this would end. He leveled the nose toward the enemy column's center, a final run. The impact was visible for miles. A flash tore across the valley, followed by a shockwave that rolled over the frozen ground. Flames rose high, swallowing the remaining trucks and men. Then came silence again, deep, final. Snow began to fall, soft and soundless, over the burning wreck. Anna stood outside the command tent, watching the distant plume of smoke climb into the sky. No one spoke. The men around her lowered their heads. She didn't cry. She couldn't. Instead, she turned toward the open plain and started walking. The journey to the crash site took hours. The snow deepened, and her legs trembled with fatigue, but she didn't stop. When she reached the blackened field, night had fallen. The plane's remains were half buried in snow, twisted and still smoking. The canopy had blown open on impact. She searched the ground until her hands went numb. Finally, she found his scarf, half burned, tangled in the snow beside the wreck. She pressed it against her face, the smell of fuel and cold metal clinging to it. Her breath came out in sharp bursts. For a long moment, she stood there, surrounded by the faint orange glow of dying fire, and whispered, "You did it." In the distance, the rumble of engines returned. Not German this time, but Soviet reinforcements arriving too late to witness what had been done. Anna turned toward the sound, the scarf still in her hand. She didn't know if Andre had survived the explosion. No body, no trace, just the wreckage and silence. But she knew this much: the convoy had made it. The wounded were safe. And for one quiet pilot who had lost everything, that was enough. She took a final look at the burning sky, her breath mixing with the falling snow, and whispered his name once more before heading back through the darkness. The faint outline of dawn already rising behind her. Spring came late to Kursk. By April, the snow had melted into gray puddles, and the airfield was once again alive with the sound of engines. The war had moved west, taking with it the thunder that once shook the ground every night. The hangars stood repaired, their metal walls hammered straight, the flag of the regiment fluttering weakly in the cool breeze. Yet one corner of the field remained quiet, a fenced patch of earth marked by the twisted remains of an old fighter plane. Mechanics called it Volkov's wreck, but no one laughed anymore. Lieutenant Anna Michailova stood by the infirmary tent, watching a group of young recruits run their pre-flight drills. Their movements were clumsy but eager. She smiled faintly at the sight. They reminded her of what the war had been before it swallowed everyone she knew. Her uniform was still the same, though the red cross on her sleeve had faded. She had stayed behind after the front shifted, refusing transfer orders. Officially, she was supervising medical logistics. In truth, she couldn't leave. It had been nearly 3 months since Captain Andrei Volkov's final flight. Command had declared him missing in action, presumed dead. A few witnesses said they'd seen his plane go down in flames. Others claimed it exploded midair. Anna never argued. She had gone to the crash site herself the next day, searched every inch until her hands bled, and found nothing but twisted metal and that single scarf, burned, torn, and still smelling faintly of smoke. She kept it folded inside her coat pocket. Some nights she still heard his voice through the static. The last transmission, the calm certainty in it. "You'll make it." It replayed in her head whenever the wind hit the hangar walls just right. She had learned not to fight it anymore. Grief had softened into something quieter, a kind of faith that didn't need proof. That morning, she was writing patient reports when a rumble of an unfamiliar engine caught her attention. She stepped outside, squinting against the sun. A transport aircraft was circling for landing, not one of theirs. Its markings were old, faded. The landing was rough, wheels cutting through wet mud before coming to a stop near the hangars. A group of soldiers ran toward it as the hatch opened. Anna stayed back at first, watching as stretchers were carried out. The transport had come from the Western Front, loaded with wounded from a recent counterattack. Most were strangers, young men, bandaged, exhausted. But then she saw him. He was walking slowly, leaning heavily on a crutch, his face hidden beneath a bandaged scarf. His uniform was scorched and patched, his left arm bound tightly against his chest. But when he turned toward the light, she knew. The shape of his eyes, the line of his jaw, unmistakable. Captain Andrei Volkov was alive. For a second, she couldn't move. The air around her seemed to stop. Then she crossed the field without thinking, mud splashing under her boots. He saw her approaching, froze, and almost lost his balance trying to straighten. They stopped a few steps apart. No salute, no words. The noise of the airfield faded around them. Anna reached for his scarf, the new one the medics had given him to hide the burns along his neck, and adjusted it gently, just as she had before that last flight. Her fingers brushed against the rough fabric, and for a moment, neither spoke. His eyes were tired but clear, filled with something she hadn't seen before. Peace. "I told you to leave," he said quietly. "You did," she replied. "And I didn't listen." He tried to smile, but the scar along his cheek pulled it into something crooked. "Some things never change." She shook her head. "No, some things survive." He glanced past her to the hangar where the wrecked plane's remains stood on display. The twisted propeller mounted like a relic, the bullet holes still visible. A small plaque beneath it read, "Flown by Captain A. Volkov. Kursk Airfield, 1943. Mechanics had built it out of respect, though no one ever spoke about it." He stared at it for a long time, then said softly, "You kept it here." "They were going to scrap it," she said. "I asked them not to." "Why?" "Because it flew when it shouldn't have." That's worth remembering. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of oil and fresh paint from the runway. In the distance, a new squadron of fighters prepared for takeoff, clean, shining, and ready for the next campaign. Anna and Andrei stood together, watching as one by one they rose into the air. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of metal, a fragment of the wreck's fuselage, polished smooth. "I kept this," he said quietly. "It was lodged in my boot when they found me. Guess it didn't want to let go." She took it carefully, running her thumb over the cool surface. "Then we'll keep it here," she said. "For both of you." When the last plane disappeared into the clouds, the field fell silent again. Andrei turned to her, his expression calm but uncertain. "I don't know what happens now," he admitted. She looked at him, then the sky. "Then we start again, same way we did before, one repair at a time." He nodded, a quiet understanding passing between them. The war was not over, not yet, but for the first time, they both felt that something inside them was. As they walked back toward the hangar, the camera would have pulled wide. The two figures crossing the muddy airfield under a clear blue sky, the ruined plane in the background catching the sunlight like old silver. For Andrei Volkov and Anna Mikhailova, the story didn't end with loss. It ended with survival, the quiet kind that comes after everything else is gone. And as the sound of engines echoed once more above them, it no longer sounded like war. It sounded like life beginning again.